I wanted a lap timer for my Taranis so that I could so that I could time my laps and see if I was getting any faster while I was flying. And I did a Google search for that, and GoDroneX has a great set of videos. One of them describes how to use a Lua script that I don't know if he made it, or I guess he must have made it, that you run on the Taranis that has all this full-featured lap timer stuff. And it's great, but I kind of felt like it was overkill for me, and I kind of wanted something simpler that I could just program right on the Taranis without having to set up a Lua script and maybe without quite all the bells and whistles that his had. And here I'm going to show you how it works. So let me start out by just showing you how it works, and then I'll show you how I programmed it. The first thing is that here's the timer right here. You flip this switch to activate the timer, and then when the copter is armed, that's my arming switch right there. I don't do stick arming. So if you do stick arming, you might just leave that out of the logic. When the copter is armed and the throttle is up, the timer starts. So the idea is that before your race, you would click the switch to the active position so that you would begin timing when the race starts. You would then arm, and then as soon as you take off, the timer is running. And then if you throttle down to 0 for any reason, the timer stops. So presumably you won't be at 0 throttle during a race. So anyway, the timer is running, and then when you finish a lap, you click this momentary switch here. The trainer switch is technically, I guess, what it is. You click this momentary switch.
15 seconds.
And it reads off the last time, and then when you release the switch, it starts the next lap. So the idea is that you would race, you would run your lap. As you cross the finish line,
7 seconds.
You would hear the time for that lap, and then you would start timing the next lap. That's how it works. When you're done, you can disarm. The timer will stop running and hold the last value. You can also, since this is a 3-position switch here, you can also flip that to the middle position, and it'll hold the last time. I don't know why you might want to do that, but it's a 3-position switch, so there you go. It'll hold the last time. It'll continue timing if you flip it back to middle, or to the up position. And then when you flip it to the down position, it resets the timer. The other thing I did was that if you click this switch under any of the unused conditions, it will not read the 0 time. So when I first set it up, anytime you click the switch, it would just say 0, 0, and I was like, well, that's annoying. So I made it so it wouldn't do that. Okay, so that's how it works. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and let me show you how I programmed it. The first thing I want you to see is the logical switches, and these are where the logic of the timer is. So switch L2 is true when the throttle is up and the copter is armed. So switch SF is my arming switch. When the throttle is armed and the copter is armed and the throttle goes up, switch L2 becomes true. Switch L3 becomes true whenever switch L2 is true and switch SG is in the active position. So switch L3 is what causes the timer to start running at all. Okay? So switch L2 says we're armed and the throttle is up. Switch L3 says all of that is true and this switch is up as well. I think that I could have combined those. Let's see, L2 and No, I can't combine them. I see there's some cases where you can combine 3 conditions and some cases where you can't. In this case, you can't combine the conditions because you need to have the throttle greater than 100 and the switch, and then a third switch. So you need to have 2 switches and the throttle that you're looking at. And the only way to do that is to combine the 2 lines. So you have line L2 looking at the throttle and the first switch, and line L3 looking at L2 and the third switch, and that ends up being a logical AND between all 3 switches. Okay, so switch L3 says the timer may run right now. And then what you do is over here you set up, oh dear. Oh, there we go. Over here you set up the timer. Timer 1 is dependent on L3. So timer 1 only runs when L3 is true. In other words, when the copter is armed and the switch is active. Okay. And then there's the reset and readout function. Now that is based off of switch L4. L4 is true when the timer is active, that's switch SG, and switch SH, which is the momentary switch. Okay, so basically if you flick the momentary switch when the timer is not active, nothing happens. Timer is active and the momentary switch. And switch L5 says only be true when the timer is actually above 0. Okay, and the timer has been active. So in other words, what those do is, here if we go to the special functions, we see that on L5, in other words, if the timer is greater than 0, if the timer is active, and if I flick this switch, then we're going to play the timer value. Anytime I flick this switch, we're going to reset the timer value. And also, anytime I reset switch SG to the upward position, we're also going to reset that value. Okay, so I would say this is moderately advanced Taranis programming, but if you have any experience with actual programming, it's just a bunch of sort of Boolean tests for conditions. It's not that complicated. Hopefully you can go back through the video if you didn't understand it the first time and work your way through and figure out exactly how you want to either recreate this or modify it for your own use. As always, happy flying.